Story 1. White Death. The White Death is a creepy story about a vengeful spirit in Mexico who hunts down anyone who knows about her existence. I am currently sitting in front of my computer, scared witless. Every moment could be my last. My friend is here with me, and he is the sole reason why my life is in danger. It may not make sense at first, but let me explain. It all started earlier today, when a friend of mine burst into my house and slammed the door behind him. His eyes were wide with fear, and he stood there with his back against the door, breathing heavily. I asked him what had happened, and he told me this story. He had been living with his aunt for the past year because his parents were in Mexico. They were doing mission work at a small hospital in southern Mexico. The previous night, a bedraggled man had stumbled through the entrance of the hospital. He was screaming in Spanish and appeared to be out of his mind with terror. They brought him over to a chair and let him sit down. As he caught his breath, he told his story in broken English. He claimed that his sister had been killed by something he referred to as La Muerto Blanco. He kept saying that it was coming for him next. Confused, they asked him who or what a Muerto Blanco was. With a look of unfathomable fear on his face, he said that La Muerto Blanco was the White Death. She is the soul of a girl who died years ago. She died by her own hand, he said, alone and unloved. She hated life so much that she wanted to remove all traces of herself from the earth. So great was her desire to completely obliterate her memory, that she returned from the dead as a vengeful spirit, bent on killing all those who knew of her existence. She is a girl, but not a girl, he said. She's not dead, but not really alive. She has cold, black eyes that weep blood. She walks without ever actually seeming to move an inch. She stalks her victims like a wild animal, pursuing them across rivers and valleys, trailing them back to their homes. You are never really aware that she is following you, until you hear her telltale knock upon your door. She knocks once for your skin, which she'll use to patch her own decaying flesh. Twice for your hair, which she'll gnash between her teeth. 3 times for your bones, which she'll fashion into clubs. 4 times for your heart, which she'll tear out of your chest. 5 times for your teeth, which she'll polish and keep in a box. 6 times for your eyes, which she'll pluck out one by one. 7 times for your soul, which she'll swallow whole. No matter where you go, the White Death will track you down, and you will hear her terrible knocking begin on the door. You can try to outrun her, but she's faster than any mortal man. If you flee from your home while she's knocking on your door, she will follow you wherever you go. The terrified man was certain that this thing had killed his sister. He had tried to tell the police about the White Death, but they would not listen, dismissing it as an old wives' tale. Next, he had tried to tell his priest, but the priest immediately shut the door of the church in his face and turned him away. The priest had seen the White Death following him, he said, and did not want to get involved. With his head in his hands, the frightened man said that the White Death follows you forever until you tell someone else about it. Then it strikes. It kills you and begins following the person you told. After finishing his tale, the man stole a car from the mission hospital parking lot and vanished into the night. Apparently, my friend's mother and father had immediately called his aunt and told her about the stand man they had encountered. They asked her if she had ever heard of the White Death. She said she had not, and they proceeded to tell her the story that the man had told them. The aunt got a phone call later that night. It was the Mexican police. They told her that the parents had been found dead outside the hospital. They had been torn apart. My friend's aunt had immediately called him at school to break the bad news to him. As he cried, she told him she couldn't understand what had happened. She recounted the whole story to him, telling him about the strange man who had turned up in the hospital just hours before his parents were found dead. She told him how the man had given his parents a weird and disturbing story about something called the White Death. When he hung up the phone, he had struggled to come to terms with what had happened. It almost didn't seem real to him. When he got home after school, he found the front door of his aunt's house standing open. Inside was a trail of blood, leading into the kitchen. There on the kitchen floor, he found his aunt's dead body. She had been torn limb from limb. He ran out of the house and all the way across town, never looking back, until he reached my house. As he told me this story, I could hardly believe it. Within the space of a day, his mother, his father, and his aunt had been murdered. It all seemed too far-fetched. But before I could utter a word, my friend and I both recoiled in horror as we heard a knocking begin at my front door. We've been staring at the door for an hour now, neither of us wanting to open it. The knocking is still going on, growing louder and louder. She never gives up. She never quits. La Morto Blanco is unstoppable. I think she wants to scare us, my friend and I. I think she wants us to blame each other. And I do, I blame my friend. It's all his fault. He should never have told about her. As I sit here in my house, beside my friend, both of us listening to that hideous knocking growing ever louder, I wish a lot of things. I wish she had killed my friend before he reached my house. If he had never been able to tell me about her, I wouldn't be in danger now. I'm sorry I ever met him. And I'm sorry for you too. I'm sorry I made you read this story. I'm sorry I ever told you about the White Death. Because now that you know about her, she'll be coming for you next. Story 2. House on Fire. House on Fire is a scary story about three friends who spend a night telling scary stories and encounter a legend that becomes frighteningly real. Let me tell you about the night my life changed forever, the night when I thought I was going to die, the night I lost my sanity. It was a warm spring night and I was 13 years old. My parents had gone on holiday for the weekend, leaving me home alone. I invited my two best friends, David and Arnold, over to keep me company. We were in my bedroom, listening to music. Arnold reached out and lowered the volume. "Hey, why don't we tell some scary stories?" he said. "I'm in the mood for a scare." "Sounds like a good idea," David agreed. "Who's going to go first?" I have one." I volunteered. "But, I don't know if I should tell it." "Come on," said David. "Let's hear it." "Okay," I said. "It's a pretty terrible story I heard once. It all happened many years ago. There was a man who had a 7-year-old son. His wife had died giving birth to the boy. They lived way out in the countryside and there were no neighbors for miles. They didn't even have a phone, because at the time, the lines didn't stretch out that far. One day, the father came home from work and he was horrified to find that his house was on fire. He immediately thought about his young son and he rushed inside, calling the boy's name. When he heard his son answer, he realized the poor boy was trapped in his bedroom. The father ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A beam had fallen from the bedroom ceiling and blocked the door. He banged and banged on the door with all his might, but it was too solid. He even rushed against it with his shoulder, trying to break it down, but it was no use. All the time, he could hear his son screaming. The boy was in a panic, screaming and crying out for help. The man kept trying to batter down the door, but no matter what he did, it held firm. He shouted in rage. He wailed in despair. He no longer thought about anything else, just the door and his son screaming on the other side. His son burned to death in the house. The father died too. He never managed to open the door, and he stayed there to the end, desperately trying to break it down until he succumbed to the smoke and the flames. Arnold looked at me in disgust and said, "That's not scary." "I have to admit, it's pretty weak," David agreed. "It's more sad than scary." That's when I decided to tell them the last part of the story. I hadn't planned on telling them that part, but I got carried away trying to impress them. It was so stupid to continue. I should never have told them. "Wait, you don't know the rest of the story," I said. Ever since then, the father's ghost is still trying to open the door and save his son. And if you say, well, I'd rather not say the exact words, but basically if you call him and tell him that everything is burning and ask him to come and help you, his ghost will appear at your door and take you away. David looked at me thoughtfully. "Have you ever tried it?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I'd be too scared to test it out." Arnold had a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Hey! We should do it right now," he said. I tensed up. I had no desire to summon a ghost and I was already sorry I had said anything about the legend. David smiled. "Yeah. Why not?" he said. I was going to tell them that I didn't want to do it, but they didn't give me a chance. Arnold put on a trembling voice to imitate the little boy and screamed, "Daddy! Daddy! Help me! The flames are all around me. I'm scared." Then, he burst out laughing. I didn't crack a smile, but he laughed. David watched him with amusement, saying nothing. Arnold started screaming again, even louder this time. "I'm burning, Daddy! I'm burning! Help! Stop it, Arnold! It's not funny!" I shouted. I didn't mean to, it just came out of me. I was really scared and I didn't want to hear him anymore. "What are you afraid of?" Arnold laughed. "Oh, come on. It's just a stupid story. That's all. Not even a good one." With a smirk, he continued. "Daddy, please help me. The fire is burning me alive. All of a sudden, there was a loud knock on my bedroom door. Arnold stopped in mid-scream. We all froze. There was an eerie silence. We all looked at each other. None of us made a sound. Boom. 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 We almost jumped out of our skin. Boom. 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 "What's that noise?" Arnold exclaimed. "If this is a joke, it's really not funny," said David. His face was white as a sheet. The banging on the door continued. Then we heard a man screaming. Those horrible cries will remain forever etched in my memory. I can still hear them now. It sounded like the cry of a dying animal. It was inhuman and infinitely sad. The banging against the door and that horrible scream continued relentlessly. I was terrified and tried to hide behind the wardrobe. Arnold grabbed a chair and stood poised to strike anyone who entered the room. David curled up against the wall, tears were streaming down his face. "No. No," he cried. "What is this? I'm scared." Immediately, the screaming outside the door grew stronger, even more harrowing, even more terrifying. The banging on the door grew louder. I thought it was going to fly off its hinges. Then panic seemed to overcome David. "I can't take it anymore," he wailed. "I've got to get out of here." With that, he ran to the window and opened it. "No," I cried. "Don't." But before I had time to finish my sentence, he jumped out the window. I heard him fall. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then, I heard him cry out in pain. "Ah! I fell. I'm hurt. My back. Ah. I'm hurt. I ran to the window and looked out. David lay on the concrete downstairs, screaming in pain. The screaming coming from behind the door got even louder and more crazed. The banging increased. I was going crazy. It was all a relentless nightmare, and David's screaming only added to the horror of the situation. Especially since Arnold and I were too scared to leave the room to help him. Then I smelled something. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now the air in the room was filled with an awful stench. It was suffocating. The smell of burning flesh. It was unbearable. I turned away from the window and saw Arnold standing motionless in the middle of the room. His eyes were wide and he was staring at the door, as if in a trance. Then, he bent over and vomited on the carpet. The banging, the screaming, the shouting, the stench of burning flesh and the sight of Arnold spewing was all too much for me. I began to throw up as well. I leaned back against the wall as David continued to howl outside and the furious knocking on the door continued. Then, I had an idea. Maybe David's cries outside were attracting the man outside the door. I closed the window. We sat on the floor with our hands over our ears, shaking in terror as the cataclysmic blows against the door continued unabated and the awful cries pierced our eardrums and the burning stench mixed with the smell of our vomit. Gradually the screams died down, the smell subsided and the banging on the door grew weaker and weaker, until finally everything was silent. All we could hear were David's muffled cries of pain, through the closed window. Arnold looked at me and asked me in a low voice, "What do we do now?" "Maybe we should call the police," I said. "Or the fire department. Or, I don't know, an ambulance to help David." "Where's your phone?" he asked. "Downstairs." "Do you think it's gone?" "Well, it's quiet," I replied hesitantly. "That's right," he said. "We'll have to go down." "Well, I'll go. Anyway, it's gone, right?" "I guess so," I said. Arnold got up slowly and hesitantly walked to the door. He gently seized the handle and pushed the door open and peeked into the hallway. It was empty. Then, with a smirk on his face, he turned to me and said, "It's crazy, the door was open all the time. This stupid ghost." But he didn't have time to finish his sentence. In a flash, a hand came around the door and grabbed Arnold around the neck. He stood there petrified, without screaming, eyes wide in terror. The arm was blackened and charred. I could smell the burning flesh. Before I had time to react, Arnold suddenly disappeared right before my eyes, dragged through the doorway and whisked down the hall at an impossible speed. The door slammed shut with a deafening clatter. I got to my feet and ran to the door, but I didn't dare to open it. I called Arnold's name again and again, but there was no response. I still couldn't bring myself to open the door. I was afraid that the charred man was still there. Nobody ever saw Arnold again after that night. My parents took me to a psychiatrist. I never told her anything, or anyone else. Not even my parents. They would never have believed me anyway. David did the same. He spent a month in the hospital. He broke his back in the fall. Even today, I still have a fear of opening doors. I'm terrified of what I might find on the other side. Story 3. Wristbands. In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm and they are taken to the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on the 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep and many of the nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with a woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor. "I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a red wristband on his arm." "A red wristband?" said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?"